Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I'm Lisa Lieberman Barzilai, the director of the Community Resources team at UJA. I want to welcome everybody to today's webinar. The synagogues joining us from the New York City area, Westchester, and Long Island, as well as to extend a very special welcome to Ari Rosenblum, the CEO from the Rockland Federation, and to all of the Rockland area organizations joining us here today. Security of our Jewish institutions and our Jewish professionals, our lay leaders, our volunteers and members is of critical importance for us at UJA, and we know for all of you as well. We want to thank you all who are joining us today, who are committed to the united purpose of keeping our people and our institutions safe. I also want to thank Ben Golub, the president of JCRC and the Community Security Initiative team, led by Mitch Silber, whose mission is to provide the support and resources that are critical in these times. And I want to thank David Pollack, the Associate Executive Director and Director of Public Policy and Security at JCRC, for all his efforts in this area. And while what will be shared today is relevant for most, we acknowledge that each institution has its own security needs and concerns, and everyone is encouraged to reach out to Mitch and his team, the CSS, and our other security partners and providers at any time. And just as a reminder for those of you who require a loan to help finance upgrades to your security infrastructure, please don't hesitate to be in contact with our partners at the Hebrew Free Loan Society. And I'll put their URL in the chat in a moment. And now I want to turn the webinar over to Ben Golub, President of New York's JCRC, to extend his welcome. Ben?
Lisa, thank you. I am the president of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, and it's also known as the JCRC. A little more than 1.5 years ago, the JCRC partnered with UJ Federation to establish the Community Security Initiative. In the shadow of Pittsburgh and Poway, Jersey City and Muncie, it was clear that the threats against Jewish communal organizations and Jews on the streets were increasing. In response, with the support of generous donors and our partners at UJ Federation, the Community Security Initiative came forward, and it grew from one person to 17 security and intelligence professionals working every day with our partners in law enforcement and homeland security to protect our community and beyond. Our exceptional team covers many different fields: physical security, cybersecurity, training, purchasing support, and intelligence gathering. For example, our intelligence analysts scour the deep and dark web looking for people who might cause harm to Jews and to our institutions. And this is done with coordination with the great work of the ADL. Supporting institutions throughout New York City, Long Island, Westchester, and now Rockland, our team delivers detailed professional security assessments for synagogues, schools, and other institutions. And many of these use these documents to apply for federal and New York State security grants. One way of looking at our effectiveness is looking at the results in terms of impact. At the outset of the Community Security Initiative in 2020, at-risk New York nonprofits received the 186 security grants totaling over $17 million. This year, 310 at-risk nonprofits will receive over $46 million, up 270%. We are proud that these totals include dozens of Jewish organizations in Rockland County, the newest region of our Community Security Initiative. Today, you will hear from our team and learn about our intelligence assessments, as well as some practical best practice. And please feel free to reach out to us with any questions or concerns. We will be there to assist you. And lastly, Shana Tova Umutuka, may you be inscribed for a good and sweet year. Now let me pass things along to Ari Rosenblum, the CEO of the Rockland Federation.
Thank you, Ben. And thank you so much to Mitch, to Lisa, and of course to David. It's great to be working with such experienced and skilled partners. And we're very happy to be involved and on board with the CSI team as well. I wanted to give a special warm welcome to our new Director of Security, Ethan Ehrlich, who is on. Ethan, if you could wave to everyone there. Ethan came aboard just about a little less than 2 months ago, and he is already making an impact here in Rockland with our community institutions across the board, from one end of Rockland to another geographically, demographically, and beyond all the distinctions and the diversity that we have here in our community. And so we're very happy to have him. And we've got a lot of work ahead of us. Thank you to those of you among our participants who are from Rockland. I wanted to really just say a couple things. This security briefing will be the first of, we expect, certainly not going to say we hope, because, we hope is that we don't have to do this at all, but we do. So I expect this will be the first of many briefings. The intention of all of that is obviously to raise the level of security and the level of awareness for all of our institutions and all of our residents here in Rockland, where I'm sitting, and across Westchester, Long Island, and the 5 boroughs. The one piece that I'm going to mention that I'm sure the professionals in the security business will describe is something that we all can take on, each and every one of us individually, and we can all advise our participants at our shuls, synagogues, or temples on our programs, and that is situational awareness. Never to take an environment for granted, and never to assume all is good if you haven't checked it out and looked around and made sure that you've got preparations in place. That situational awareness is something we need to have with us 24/7, every day of the week, every week of the year, and especially so around the high holidays. And the last thing I wanted to mention really is that, what we do is a balance between strategy and tactics. We have to be aware of what we can do right now, today, to secure our institutions and secure our participants, and to be aware of what's going on around us. We also have to look at and work for what we can achieve in the long run with partners such as we have here. And I wanted to mention CSS as well. Thank you for participating with us. And others like ADL. We need to look at what we can do in the long run, whether it's lobbying for funding for nonprofit security grants, as we do through Jewish Federations of North America, whether it is, working on intelligence with law enforcement, and whether it's strategic planning to fund all of our initiatives. We need to think both in terms of what we can do right now and what we need to do in the long run. At the end of the day, it's a lot to do. But we shouldn't be intimidated by it. We should look at the challenge as something that it's given to us. It's given to each of us in the Federation or the security world, and it's given to each of you who have synagogues and congregations to be responsible for. So I wanted to wish you Hatzlacha and wish all of you Shana Tova.
Thank you, Ari. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mitch Silber, the Executive Director for the Community Security Initiative. And I'm going to give you an idea of what our plan is for this afternoon's briefing. First, we're going to hear from Rebecca Fetterman, our threat intelligence analyst at the Community Security Initiative, and she'll be talking about the threat picture for the greater New York area. Then we're going to turn things over to one of our partner organizations, CSS, and we'll hear from Richard Priem, who's their COO and Deputy National Director. And then I'll step in and provide a briefing on everyday security procedures, something that our team here at CSI has been working and developing this summer, and something to keep in mind as we head into the Chagim. So with that, let me turn things over to Rebecca first.
Thank you, Mitch. Okay. So I think it's important to take a step back and look at things nationally before we drill down to New York. And I think it's no surprise to everybody on this call that the last 2 years in particular, we have seen a significant proliferation of hate incidents, an extreme threat environment, both nationwide and of course in New York State. And so against this backdrop, in June of 2022, the DHS also indicated that faith-based institutions and religious minorities are among the likely targets for such violent extremists. And I'm sure that you all remember back in May of this year at the Top supermarket in Buffalo, in which an extremist engaged in a mass shooting. And while his target in that incident specifically was not the Jewish community, he did dedicate 29 pages of his horrific manifesto to anti-Semitic imagery, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, and his conclusion that, quote, "The Jews are the biggest problem the Western world has ever had. They must be called out and killed." There is currently an array of groups, both officially organized and those loosely organized, who view the Jewish community and Jewish institutions as legitimate targets. We have groups such as Al-Qaeda, who, if you remember, in January of 2020 in the Colleyville hostage situation, in which the perpetrator was calling for the release of a convicted Al-Qaeda supporter. And subsequent to this hostage crisis, Al-Qaeda publications lauded the hostage taker as a hero. We have ISIS, whose propaganda materials consistently call for killing Jews, including offering financial rewards for doing so. We have Hezbollah, who over the last few years, operatives have been caught doing reconnaissance in New York City, among other locations, and subsequently arrested. And we have Iran, who as recent as July of 2022, their Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps shared a video on social media indicating that they will develop nuclear weapons if the, quote, US or Zionist regime make any stupid mistakes, and that their ballistic missiles will turn New York into hellish ruins. The 4 pictures on the right of this slide were all taken in New York itself. We have white supremacist groups and neo-Nazi groups that are actively recruiting in New York. We have anti-Semites who are distributing propaganda, some throwing flyers directly onto people's lawns and driveways. And we have anti-Zionist extremists who have held protests on an almost weekly basis here in New York, where we've witnessed them praising Hamas, calling to globalize the Intifada, and even engaging in violence. And the data really speaks for itself. The ADL conducts an anti-Semitism audit every single year. And this is the data for their most recent audit that was presented from 2021. Across the country, we have seen a rise in anti-Semitic incidents. In 2021, they tabulated over 2,700 incidents across the country, which was a 34% increase from the incidents tabulated in 2020, and the highest number on record since the ADL began tracking these incidents in 1979. As you can see on this chart of the country, all of the states in yellow indicate states where there were at least 40 or more incidents. And unsurprisingly, New York had the most number of incidents. So let's drill down to New York State. We see that between 2020 and 2021, incidents rose 24%, with a total of 416 reported incidents to the ADL in 2021. 161 of these incidents involved a swastika, and 51 incidents involved assault, which is the most ADL has ever recorded in New York State. As it pertains to Jewish institutions, which is why we're all on this call today, in 2021, there were 61 reported incidents at Jewish institutions, including synagogues, Jewish community centers, schools, and this was an increase of 41% in 2020. And while this number may in part be due to the fact that there were COVID closures in 2020, it really still underscores the need that we all take Jewish communal security at institutions very seriously. The data is echoed from the ADL and NYPD's hate crimes dashboards. This is their dashboard that shows from January of 2020 through their most recent reporting in June of 2022. And it is pretty alarming. We see there were 466 incidents against the Jewish community. And as you look at the word cloud on the right, you can see that Jews are by far the most targeted group consistently year after year. And if we drill down to the most recent data from January of 2022 through the end of June 2022, Jews were the most targeted group. 44% of the hate crimes committed in New York City were against the Jewish community, and this accounts for 149 anti-Semitic incidents. In this same period in 2021, we had 106 incidents, so this represents a great increase. And to provide you the most up-to-date information that we have from NYPD statistics, this is from July of 2022. It demonstrates the incidents that took place in 2022 versus 2021. There were 15 anti-Semitic hate crimes targeting the Jewish community in just July of 2022, which represents an 114% increase from the incidents that occurred in July in 2021. Now, while the outlook may seem bleak, we are incredibly fortunate as a community that we do have a myriad of resources dedicated to keeping us safe, whether it be my team, the Intel Analyst team, my colleagues at CSI, my colleagues at CSS, my colleagues at the ADL. And so I will turn it back over to Mitch so that you can hear from these dedicated colleagues how to best keep your institution safe and secure during the upcoming holidays and beyond.
Great. Thanks so much, Rebecca. Obviously, very sobering data, and just part of the rationale for holding your briefing like this and having the partners on. So with that, let me turn things over to Richard Priem, this Deputy National Director and COO of CSS. We have a very strong partnership with CSS, really value their volunteers. We're often manning a post outside a synagogue, and really another set of eyes and ears out there to help us detect suspicious activities. So with that, let me turn it over to Richard.
Thank you, Mitch. And let me share my screen so everybody can follow what I'm saying. I think it's very, on behalf of CSS, we're very glad to be here today. And I'm assuming everybody can see the presentation. The partnership is two sides. We very much appreciate our partnership with CSI. Our volunteers around the country, and especially New York, regularly ask for advice on threat assessments or other kind of guidance. And it is really helpful to have a partner at the Federation, to have CSI to refer them to. And I briefly want to talk today about detecting suspicious activity and why it matters. And this is a big part of what our volunteers in front of institutions and events do. Before I go into that, a few quick things about the CSS. For those of you who don't know us, we were founded in 2007 by a group of community members with backgrounds in security and law enforcement. We are a nonprofit dedicated to protecting Jewish life and the Jewish way of life. And we do that by training volunteers to form teams to protect their own institutions and events. We have partnerships with CSI, of course, but also with the Secure Community Network and the Anti-Defamation League. And to date, we have trained over 6,000 volunteers and maintain active teams, security teams of volunteers at over 125 institutions in more than a dozen states. So Rebecca just gave us an overview of the threats that we are facing, and I want to zoom in on three big incidents that I'm sure all of you have heard about: the terrorist attack on the Tree of Life synagogue in Pittsburgh, the attack on the Chabad of Poway, and earlier this year, the hostage situation at Colleyville, attacked by someone who flew in from the United Kingdom. The reason I want to zoom in on these more, every attack, of course, is serious, but these are more complex attacks that we've faced recently. And of course, there's more, but I just zoom in on these for illustration. And most of these serious attacks have two things in common. And the first is obvious, and I don't think I need to tell you, but that's that they're motivated by anti-Semitism. But the second thing that most of these attacks have in common is that the perpetrators spend significant time conducting research, reconnaissance, and surveillance of their targets. And this is important to note because I'm going to show you what most people go through when they hear about an attack. Most people will learn that an attack took place. I'm sure about the three big attacks I just mentioned, and you remember where you were when you learned about it on the news. Then there will be news reports, and there's a whole aftermath where people talk about the victims and about the perpetrator. But what people are usually not spending a lot of time talking about is the amount of hours, days, weeks, and in some cases months of preparation, surveillance, and reconnaissance done by the perpetrators before they picked and chose their target. And this is important to know because this is where we can do something about it. This is where we can detect those suspicious behaviors, report it, and hopefully thwart these attacks before they happen. The information that people are looking for, some of that can be found online. They can search for your website. They can follow you on social media. They can even use Google Maps Street View to look at your location. And there's things that they can find out about the times that services start, if that's announced on your website, or the kind of street layout through the Street View option of Google Maps. Obviously, there's a lot of things you can do, and I know Mitch has a training with his team on how to reduce the vulnerability online of your institution. But a very easy tip can be to be conscious of what you post online and to see if there's any kind of password protected membership feature you can have. But for the sake of this presentation, I just want you to be aware that people might be looking online to find out information that will help them in planning their attack. And the other part of it, no matter how much you find out online, there are certain pieces of information for which they will have to go to the location. Like, what is the parking situation like? What is the traffic? Who works there, and what are their behaviors? Is there any security presence, whether it's guards or cameras? How are the neighbors? Is there next door a cafe or something else that might be a complicated factor? What are the routines? When do people arrive and leave? How do I get away from there? What are the access and escape routes? These are all questions that people who are planning an attack need to answer, because they're going to do something that might land them in prison for the rest of their life, or might get them killed. So they want to succeed in their attack. And we've seen in all these serious incidents that significant amount of time and resources were dedicated to reconnaissance surveillance. Just for a little anecdote, Rebecca mentioned at the beginning of her presentation this quote about from the manifesto of the shooter in the Buffalo supermarket. Even though that wasn't a Jewish target, the day before, the perpetrator was sitting in front of the supermarket for several hours to observe the goings at that particular supermarket. Just to give an example of that, these things actually do happen, and they happen more often than we think. Two examples relevant to our community that I just want to highlight because I don't think you have heard of them. First is what happened in 2018 in Long Island. Details of this incident came out only a few weeks ago. A news report published on it about the court proceedings. But basically, someone did not succeed in his attack, but he was planning. There was a former Marine was planning to attack a synagogue on Long Island, and it turned out that he did, together with a few other people who are also being arrested, was doing mock drills behind the facility to sort of plan their attack. They were documented. The camera equipment that was attached to the building. So this really happened. It happened on Long Island, and luckily this attack never materialized. And on the right of the screen, you have a person named Richard Holzer. He was sentenced to prison for 20 years last year because he planned to perpetrate an attack on a synagogue as well. And as part of the investigation by the FBI, it turns out that he had taken pictures, he had taken video footage, not just of the building, but even of people walking in and out of the facility, all because he wanted to have the right information to plan his attack. So these things, this hostile reconnaissance, it does happen. And we have an opportunity to detect that kind of behavior, and as a result, prevent or deter attacks. And it goes back to that situational awareness that Ari was talking about in the beginning. So I'm going to go over a few examples of what are the kind of suspicious behaviors. And I want to underscore we're looking for behaviors, not people of a certain gender, religion, or ethnic background, but the kind of suspicious behaviors that we have seen prior to attacks. If you see a person stay in front of the facility for long periods of time who doesn't have a good reason for being there, someone walking around multiple times, showing an interest, videotaping, photographing or sketches or taking notes on the facility, its security personnel or equipment. Someone entering an unauthorized area, maybe to see what happens if he or she does that, or someone who's tampering with security equipment. If someone asks weird questions of you or one of your colleagues or someone from your community that seem odd, it can be suspicious as well. And if someone does try to answer and somebody asks a few questions, for example, a CSS volunteer or somebody else is asking questions of why they want to visit and they cannot give good answers, or the answer contradict one another, these are suspicious behaviors as well. For cars, if someone is driving with unusual speed and the people inside the car take an interest in the facility, they're driving around multiple times. We see this a lot with our volunteer security teams. The same car gets spotted by multiple Jewish institutions. And because we have volunteers on site, they see this and we can report it to Mitch, to law enforcement to take action. And if a car is parked or standing somewhere with someone inside, but it doesn't really fit the time and place for that car being there, maybe the license plates doesn't match, or there's dark tinted windows, or there's a bumper sticker that indicates political views or other kinds of views that somehow are concerning to you, and our community. Similarly, as someone walking by or standing in front of somebody's parked near the building and take an interest in the facility, or if you can see that there's something suspicious inside the car, like big packages or posters that indicate a message against the Jewish community, or wires or anything that you think is suspicious, you should take notice. Now, what do you do if you see anything like that? Obviously, we train our volunteers to take more advanced measures when they spot these kind of behaviors. But in your case, if you see it and you have security on site, mention it to them. If you have it, or if you don't have it, report it to CSI, report it to law enforcement. If you have CSS on site, make sure that the CSS team leader learns about it. We need to detect these kind of behaviors so that we can put the dots we get together through Rebecca, through law enforcement, through our partners at ADL, and detect, deter, and prevent attacks before they take place. I know Mitch will be talking a lot more about tangible security measures you can take at your institution. I just want to put this out here. If any of you is new to CSS, is not part of our network yet, and wants to get involved, we have 2 programs. Entry Point is our introductory program. You can sign up on our website if you are authorized from your synagogue or institution to do so. And it's a 1-hour training where we delve much deeper in the topics I just talked about and raise that awareness in your community, but also to set the stage for our second program, CSS Synagogue, where we really take a group of volunteers from the community and train them to form volunteer security teams during Shabbat, during high holidays. And they become part of our network, and we provide continuing guidance, and we're able, with the more institutions that have these teams, to be better able to detect the kind of activities that take place and put dots together and get people that seek harm to our community, to get them arrested and make sure that they cannot do that harm. Website is at the bottom of the page. I just want to thank CSI and JCRC for having us here and to demonstrate the partnership that we have on an ongoing basis. And I'll be staying around for any questions toward the end of the panel. And back to you, Mitch.
Great, thanks, Richard. And that's just a good point to remind everyone, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We'll be going to the Q&A after this next presentation, which I'm giving. And you've heard from Lisa and you heard from Ben about some of CSI's work in terms of helping institutions win grants, heard about our cybersecurity program, you've heard about our threat intelligence. But from our team out in the field, over the last few months, we've gotten a lot of different questions from institutions on what should they be doing on a daily basis to make sure that their institution is safe. And that triggered a discussion on our team as to what guidance should we be providing to institutions. And it's useful every day, but it's also even much more of an issue as we approach the high holidays. So today I'll be talking about that. What we're calling sort of everyday security procedures and their best practices. So our disclaimer, but we're really going to be talking about 7 primary topics today. The threats and vulnerabilities of institutions. What should your procedures be when you come in, when you close, during the day? What is suspicious behavior? We heard about that from Richard. Security searches. What should that involve? Screening for people, mail deliveries. What happens when you get threats, anonymous messages, as well as your security plan for daily operations. So we can talk about 2 different topics here, threats and vulnerabilities. And again, we heard from Rebecca some of the different groups that are threatening. And on the left, we have some of the different ways that they can manifest those threats. whether it's with IEDs or vehicle-borne threats, arson. We've certainly seen this proliferation of individuals' mental health issues. But then there's the vulnerabilities for our institutions. Where are our weak points that we really want to strengthen? Is it a question of that we don't control access to the institution, or we're not controlling who's coming into our institutions? Or do we have windows or doors that are easily penetrated? Or is there just human error? People day to day made a mistake and left some vulnerability. Unfortunately, we heard about this school in Uvalde. So let's talk about opening, closing, and midday security procedures. And again, this is for every day, but obviously much more important as we approach Rosh Hashanah. So, the first person to open your institution really needs to have that situational awareness, taking a look at the perimeter, looking at the doors to see if anything's opening. Is there someone outside potentially watching them open up your location? And then once they get inside, has the alarm system been triggered? Seeing what did the cameras collect overnight? There should be a checklist for your institution for those people who normally open up, and they should be carrying that out each and every day to make sure that they detect if there's some type of difference from the norm. During the day, while you're in operations, is a time that we want to also be vigilant. And we want to make sure that we're keeping that situational awareness in place, looking to see, as Richard mentioned, are there people outside watching you? And during the day, it's worthwhile to have a checklist for your staff that they're making sure is that doors are closed. Even if people are going out for a smoke break or a lunch break, that those doors have to be closed. During the day, do you have some type of alarm system that's on for certain parts of your building? And bottom line, if you do see something, we need you to say something. You'll never go wrong by reporting something or being too vigilant on that issue. And it's really small actions that people do on a daily basis that can make a difference. We always talk about security guards and their roles. And I think some institutions we found, once they hire a security guard company, think that they've completed their mission. But really, you need to provide guidance to those security guards on what you want them to do during the daily basis. We talked about post orders, right? And that literally means telling them, where do you want them to stand? Where do you want them to walk? And what should there be their routine for the day? Obviously, there's the benefit of having paid guards, but if you're a synagogue and during services and you can recruit a team of volunteers to get training through CSS, that's a force multiplier. That's a whole nother set of eyes and ears that are aware, and they know what's normal at your institution, even more so than any paid guards. And it's important, whether they're volunteers or paid guards, that there should be a security plan that everybody is on the same page for. And what about at the end of the day? Well, again, there should be this sort of checklist that the last people out fulfill, making sure that the doors and windows are locked, making sure that the location is actually empty, making sure your camera system is on and the alarm system is on, and making sure, again, that someone isn't watching you from across the street to track when your institution closes. And again, these all fit under this larger topic of situational awareness. And then when you do detect something, who has the responsibility to report that? Is that the executive director? Is that the head of your security? Is there a reporting hierarchy inside your organization? And what is the threshold to call 911 if you see something that's really of concern? Our guidance is that there really should be a low threshold and that everyone in your institution should be empowered to call 911 if they think they see something that's that concerning. And, as Richard mentioned in talking about suspicious behavior, it's really all what is the change from the normal, right? What doesn't fit? In the counterterrorism world, looking for people who are wearing long overcoats in the summer, thinking they might be having some type of explosives under their coat is one of sort of the trademark, observational skills that you're doing. Is someone trying to get into your facility multiple different ways in a way that makes you suspicious? Again, and we keep on harping on this idea of people outside loitering, taking pictures, observing your organization. And then, or even asking questions that seem out of the norm. And then last but not least, have they left some type of package at your doorway or outside your institution? All of these things constitute suspicious behavior, and you're well within your observational techniques to sort of, report that either internally or externally to the police if you're that concerned. Screening for people and deliveries is important. And we understand that you have to have that balance between welcoming new members to your institution, but at the same time, controlling access. I mean, that's really been the message from Colleyville and other attacks against Jewish institutions worldwide. If you can keep threatening people out, you have a much better chance of resolving this situation peacefully. So if you're dealing with employees, we think there should be an onboarding and offboarding protocol. We'll talk a little bit about that. And we'll talk about screening in this next section as we talk about who do you let into your institution, as well as mail and deliveries. So, new members, high holidays are coming up, so people may be signing up to become new members of your institution. What is your process for having that? We certainly don't want to discourage new people from joining your synagogue, but how did they get to you? Do they fill out an application form? You may not do a background check, but did someone refer them? Are you going to meet with them as an appointment to sort of, vet them and make sure that they're someone who you feel comfortable joining your congregation? Do they come into your institution just off the street without a scheduled appointment? Now, some of these things are best practices, that you do have some threshold that people have to pass through before they join and gain membership to your organization. So these are some things to keep in mind. And we're going to make these slides available after the presentation because I know there's a lot to take in. Similarly, just as you would vet people who are looking to join your organization, of course, when you're adding new employees, background checks, and screenings are definitely something that we recommend. And everyone should go through a security training protocol so that they know what to do in the event that there is that type of an emergency. Okay. And similarly, when someone leaves your organization, you want to make sure you get back those keys, those fobs. You're going to change passwords, make sure that they no longer have computer access. If there's a person who's left your organization because you're no longer comfortable with them being there, you do need to take these types of procedures, especially if that person was asked to leave your organization under a bit of a cloud. So these are just sort of best practices that we recommend that all of our institutions utilize when people both join as an employee, but also when they leave. We talk about screening for the high holidays, and if you've been on a CSI webinar before, you've heard about this from us. We try to divide people into sort of three buckets. They're the known. These are the regulars, the people who are always showing up for services, your security guard, your volunteers, they know them, and it's easy to let them in. They're sort of on the fast pass, if you will. Then there are the known unknowns. You don't know this person, but they're on the list. They've bought tickets for the high holidays. They're signed up for the Goldstein Bar Mitzvah, and you can check their name off the list. And then there are the unknown unknowns. They show up at your door. You don't know them. And the question is, what do you do? This was the situation that faced the Colleyville Synagogue last January, and we believe that the proper action was to vet that person, but to keep that person outside. Don't let them inside your institution until you feel like you've been able to vet them or you have some comfort level. Because once you lose access control, once an unauthorized person is inside, it's a much more difficult situation to remediate. And again, we understand, this is a balance that we're looking to achieve between being welcoming, trying to have people come back to our organizations after 2.5 years of COVID and encouraging prayer in person, but also at the same time, the highest priority has got to be keeping our services safe and secure. Unfortunately, over the last 1.5, 2 years, a lot of Jewish institutions that we work with have received some type of anonymous threat, bomb threat over email. And we've tried to put together some basic protocols in case that happens to you. When that email or call comes in, what do? Do you call 911? Who conducts a security search? Do you evacuate or not? How do you communicate that information to the staff, to the membership? So these are among the different issues that are on the table when this might happen. What you have here, and this is something that we suggest, be posted in your mailroom, is sort of a guide as to what you should do with package screening. In terms of, vetting these packages, and if you do have some level of concern, what should you do? Should you reach out to law enforcement? If it's a suspicious package, certainly don't open it, don't smell it, don't taste it. And this is something that if you do have procedures in place, you would isolate the suspicious letter or package. So this is something that you do in the physical realm if there's a package that comes in that you're concerned about. Bomb threats, as I mentioned, have happened all to a number of JCCs and synagogues as well. They become common. We think of them to some degree, people are trying to create almost a theater where they get you to act. It's a way to harass and disrupt your daily operations. It's costly. You may have to take actions that shut it down for the day. And thankfully, very rarely has this actually been a true bomb. It's just been a threat to try and disrupt us. So what's our guidance on this? Well, number one, don't try and handle this yourself. If there's some type of email or phone call that threatens you with a bomb, first thing you do is you reach out to law enforcement. And number two, hopefully you have a bomb threat plan in place. And if you don't have one, our team can help you structure that. And ideally, your staff knows what you're going to do. Are you going to evacuate? Are you going to shelter in a certain location? And we always encourage training to that plan. You really want to map this out so that when that threat comes in, this isn't the first time that you're going through those training procedures. And, one of the basic things that you can do is try and figure out, is this high, medium, or low risk, right? Low risk, it's vague, it's indirect. They are not naming your institution per se. They're not naming you as an individual. They're not naming people there, maybe even a caller that you've heard from previously. So we would say that's low risk. Medium risk, it sounds more realistic. They have some details that are specific to your institution, and they've sort of planned this out a little bit. They may even tell you a place and time that the bomb is supposed to go off. That's, medium risk. High risk is the most specific. They're willing to say who their identity is, what they're planning on doing, and give you some indication that this isn't the first time that they've done this, that they've practiced this. But regardless, high, medium, or low, we want you to call law enforcement and bring them into the equation so that they can weigh in and help you take the steps that are necessary. And just to make this point, evacuation, that might seem like, the first move to make, but actually that requires a thought process because it's not always the correct decision. Our concern being that someone might make a bomb threat in order to lure your personnel outside where they might be laying in waiting. So, that should be an executive leadership decision, usually made in coordination with law enforcement. And, there may be and that's really, the more severe the threat is, the more likely that's going to be the route that we suggest you going. What about searching the premises for some type of potential bomb threat? Who should do that? Again, this is not for everyone in the organization to do. First should be trained law enforcement officers, maybe building staff, but only those who've gotten the proper training. Really the goal or the role for staff is the fact that your institution, places where people, might put things, and what the baseline is. Again, what is something different from the norm? And, communication is key. We talked about this, who calls the police, who indicates an emergency. And this is something that you should have a protocol in place for your institution, chain of command, how is that security guard going to let the executive director and the rabbi know that there's an emergency that is potentially unfolding? But again, if it's a real emergency, everyone is empowered to call law enforcement with 911. How can you do it? This diagram, text, email, if you've got a PA system. Some organizations, Orthodox synagogues, have a visual sort of paging device there that's on all the time. Fire alarm, obviously, for fires. But we recommend for your everyday operations to have walkie-talkies, PA systems in place, so you have multiple modalities to be able to communicate to the membership, to the congregants who are there. And last but not least, sort of our final pre-high holiday checklist, make sure that you have some type of security personnel at your facility. Ideally, you have armed people outside and screeners at your entranceway. And be sure to plan the fact that you're going to be screening large numbers of people. And we talked about the role of volunteers who will know who the regulars are. Have this plan in place, considering that you're going to be, if these are going to be the days that you're most full all year round. And you should factor in that you're going to have, if you need to evacuate, there'll be children, there'll be elderly people, and also give that guidance to your security guards, what their post order should be. Where do you want them to stand? Where do you want them to patrol? Great to have an emergency plan for an active shooter, for fire, but even better if your staff knows about it, as well as local law enforcement. Reach out to local law enforcement, remind them, the days of Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, that you're going to be busiest, so that maybe they can have a patrol car there and they're on a higher state of awareness. There was an attack on a synagogue in Germany a couple of years ago in Halle, Germany, and local law enforcement didn't respond. So we want to make sure that local law enforcement let CSI know. Our team can make sure if you're not getting the response you want from local law enforcement. Again, every day, making sure you're checking those emails and deliveries. We've had JCCs that received an email 48 hours before that there was a bomb threat. No one was checking that institutional email, so they wouldn't even know what to do if their bomb threat was real. So if you've got a general email, make sure that that is checked on a regular basis. Hopefully, COVID preparation is not as big of an issue as it's been in past years. But if you are a congregation that you're working through those issues, an electronic form is a very efficient way to do that, to make sure that people have the proper certifications and vaccinations, if that's part of your plan. And then last but not least, we talked about communications, multiple modalities for communicating both within your institution as well as outside. And last but not least, test your equipment before the high holidays, the cameras, the alarm system, panic buttons. Make sure that they're all working, because you don't want to use one of those systems and find that in the moment it fails. So again, I know there's a lot that we've thrown at you with this briefing. We're going to make these slides available to all of you afterward. But now we're going to turn things over to Q&A, and Bill Hayes, who is our Regional Security Director for Bronx and Westchester.
All right, thanks, Mitch. The main question really is everybody's interested in knowing if they will have access to the slide presentations from today.
Yeah, we're going to post the recording of this briefing as well as the slides, and we'll send it out in an email to everyone who's signed up for today. And we'll do that within the next 24 hours.
Thanks. And that's actually all I have for the moment in the chat. But if I could, Mitch, just take a moment to point out, there was one other question that had to do with security volunteers or security committee making security recommendations that aren't necessarily heeded by the leadership or the administration of the shul. That just, it really underscores the need to make security decisions not in a vacuum, but to engage really the whole of community. And by community, I'm referring to whoever the stakeholders are in that particular institution.
Feel free again to reach out to our team if your institution, you feel like you need, quote unquote, outside perspective to weigh in with the security committee. We're making these assessments based on our observations, and provide sort of an unbiased view as to what we think needs to be done to make it more secure.
All I have for now, Mitch.
All right. Well, again, thank you all for taking time in your busy day to talk about security in advance of the Chagim. Ari, yes.
I was just gonna say a question just popped up in the chat you may want to address.
Yep, just getting to me. Thanks, Ari. Question is, we will be having outdoor services on premises. What do you recommend we prioritize?
So, when your services are outside, obviously that introduces an element of vulnerability by not being protected by the four walls and access control. Really one of the first things is to reach out to local law enforcement and make sure that that police department knows that you're planning to do this. They'll help you figure out ways to create some barriers to protect that outdoor service, and whether it's parked cars or other types of barriers, so that you really want to prevent someone with a vehicle from being able to access it. That's number one. And then a question of just what will your security picture look like? What will your profile? Will you have guards? Will there be multiple exit and entry points? Those are key issues. And again, I recommend that you reach out to someone on our team, to CSS, to talk through those issues, because outside, and we've been dealing with it all for the last couple of years, just for the, for COVID and the complexities of that.
Thanks, Mitch. And another question just came up, and this one arises quite a bit. So it's a really good question. Can you give us some specific guidelines for vetting a new person who wants to come to your service who has not registered? And follow up to that from another attendee, are you recommending that service times not be posted on the website? So they're somewhat related, vetting new people that want to come and making service times available to the public.
Right. Well, look, the vetting issue is obviously, a delicate one. I think one of the best ways you can do this is ask them, if they know somebody else in the congregation who can recommend them. And basically asking for a reference. I think that's a good sort of non-confrontational question to ask. And then probably a basic Google search, just to sort of give yourself an idea of who is this person you're letting into your sacred space. So I think those might be two sort of top line ways to vet potential new members. And then if you really have concerns, and we face this, our team has seen this where institutions have said, we just don't like what's coming back, then again, involve a security professional on that issue. The person just shows up at the door for the service. That's tricky, because then you now have to make an on the spur of the moment decision again. But I think you should probably have 2 or 3 questions who your security guard is there, who can ask a person who's showing up unannounced. And it doesn't have to be LL security at the airport, what your Parsha was for your bar mitzvah, but a couple questions that will sort of vet out, does this person really know much about our congregation? And then there's a certain amount that just sort of intuition. So I think you should need to empower the security people. If the hair on the back of their neck is up and they're concerned about this person, that they have the authority to not let that person in, and or bring in someone from executive staff to weigh in.
Thanks, Mitch. This one is probably more for Richard. What's the lead time to train a synagogue volunteer security team? How long does that take? And just to follow up on Mitch, I want to point out that David has posted the Power of Hello website, which is supported by DHS-CSI. It provides a lot of good information on what you can do at the door, at the threshold, in order to screen people coming into your location.
So that's a very good non-confrontational guide, the Power of Hello, that is worthwhile looking at, and potentially even printing out and having your security guards read in advance of the holidays. So thanks, David.
And regarding the question about the lead time to train a synagogue team, there's multiple levels. The introductory program entry point, which is meant to get as many members of your community the basics of security awareness and some common sense security tips, is 1 hour, and it's delivered virtually over Zoom. And then to move further and get a team ready to actually start taking shifts and to learn how to search and sweep a building, to do access control, as Mitch referred to, and some basic scenario training to respond to a bunch of different things that could happen at your institution. The training will be around 7 hours, 4 hours of online self-paced module, followed by a 3-hour workshop where a trainer will come out to your institution and train you. And then there's many more levels of training available to the team, to the volunteers, if they want to, and there's ongoing guidance as well. And sometimes we work with Mitch and CSI to do a training together. But to answer your question, the minimum is 7 hours.
Can you talk a little bit about paid detail?
Sure. Thanks, Terry. Yeah, NYPD, if you're in the environs of New York City, has a program called Paid Detail, where a NYPD officer who is not working that day can come and protect your institution for a shift. You do have to sign up in advance and sort of be vetted by NYPD and be approved by them. This is a very low cost and efficient way to have a uniformed officer with his weapon and walkie-talkie and phone there to protect the institution. We've been working closely with NYPD. There are some hiccups in the process, in the sense that officer may get called away last minute, so we wouldn't recommend that as your one and only modality of security. But it could be an enhancement, an extra layer. Volunteers, paid security, plus paid detail. I mean, that's a pretty impressive, vanguard right there to have in front of your institution. Those sort of 3 levels of security. But again, that's something that's really only available in New York City, and it takes some time to put in place.
Thanks, Mitch. And if I could just point out, outside the city, I'm not sure if you covered this because I was distracted for a moment. All the local police agencies have differing frameworks on how they make off-duty officers available to the public. You'd have to contact each individual agency. Sometimes they permit a direct hire, or similar to New York City doing the paid detail. One other question, Mitch, if you could repeat the answer to the question about posting service hours to the public on the publicly facing website. Some folks missed that.
Right. Look, that's a difficult situation, because on one hand, you want to encourage and make your services welcoming to people, and if they don't know when they are, they can't really show up. On the other hand, it is enabling someone with bad intentions to know when your services are. It's really a judgment call. Clearly, the safer thing to do is to only make it, available via email or a password to your website to current congregants. But look, someone who's thinking about attacking a synagogue on Rosh Hashanah, any type of, basic Google research is going to tell them what time services are generally. So you're really not protecting it that much by hiding those hours. But again, it's a judgment call. There's not really a right and wrong on it. Just because the nature of the way things are now, I can understand why it's a consideration.
Do we have time for one more?
Sure.
The question concerns attire. Is there a preferred form of attire that security guards should wear?
Well, I think, there are 2 approaches to this. One is the deterrence approach. You want to have a security guard there who's someone who's doing any type of passive reconnaissance, says, oh, there is some type of, person serving as a barrier to getting in. So something that looks like a security guard, some type of uniform. If you've got the luxury of having multiple people there, then you might have a mix where there are a couple of people who are uniformed, and then you have 1 or 2 who are in regular street clothes, and that's sort of more of a covert security presence that you have there. But if you only have enough for 1 or 2 security guards, better to be overt, uniform, and provide some type of deterrence. So that if someone is thinking about going to your location, they say, you know what, maybe I'll go someplace else. I don't want to have to deal with that security guard.
Thanks, Mitch. That's all I have for now.
Great. Well, again, thanks everyone for participating. Lisa, Ben, Richard, Ari, great to have you on board, and hugs and back to everyone.